Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Down in Alabama. I'm here with AL.com reporter Leada Gore. My name is Ike Morgan, and we bring you a quick news update every weekday. But on the weekend, we like to set a spell and get a topic or two that we can chew on and take a little further. We don't plan to stay purely Alabama focused in our conversation this week, but it applies here as well as it does anywhere else. The hottest political story this week, even pushing aside Bob Woodward's book about the Trump presidency, was the anonymous op-ed writer who appeared in the New York Times, saying that he or she was part of a covert ring of administration officials who were doing the heroic work of saving us all from President Trump's worst inclinations, while allowing the more successful and principled parts of his agenda to work. Well, a lot of folks have issues with the anonymous aspect. On one side, people take it to believe the Times just made it up. And on the other side, people are saying, man, if you want to make a difference, you got to speak up for real, call them out, and don't just kind of help them keep a dangerous situation moving forward. Now, Leada, you've been a political reporter and an editor, and you can speak to this. Why did the New York Times publish an anonymous piece this explosive?
Well, it's a very interesting decision, and I read something, sort of surrounding that decision. And my big question, and I think this is a lot of people's big question, is, in fact, Sarah Sanders mentioned this, I think, in one of her White House briefings, is they attributed the op-ed to a high place. They didn't use the word high place, but an administration official,
senior,
meaning
they
someone
senior.
who's not just senior. Right, thank you. Somebody who's not just sitting there answering the phone. Mm-hmm. And where to me so much of this hinges is, if it comes out that it's not a senior administration official, or that's even up for doubt, they've really got major egg on their face. Mm-hmm. So, your inclination is to think, it's the New York Times, surely they vetted their sources, and, this is absolutely somebody that's very important. But at the same time, I would hate to have had made that call. Let's just say that. Yeah. To be sitting in that room, I'd have to be looking eye to eye to somebody and say, you're going to tell me every single thing, and you better have some proof to back it up. Because if you read the op-ed, while it makes claims, they're not claims like, on this day this happened. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of like, we don't like what he's doing, and so we're working behind the scenes to undermine him. No. And so it's just I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it. It's not my call to make that decision. I think I would have to have had more information, and I hope they did have more information before making that call.
Yeah. Surely this is well vetted. Now, but there is an issue with what you talked about, the senior official. That phrase is batted around so much when people cover in Washington. Sure. There are so many senior officials that go off the record. Very few low-level officials are quoted in these stories. You know what I mean?
Right. They don't say this is the guy who answers the mail at the White House who told me this, who probably knows more than the senior official, if you want to be, very blunt about things. But it's a very nebulous term.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that might mean. I mean, a lot of people, right. The favorite thing here was to, and when I say here, I mean in Alabama, since we have the Attorney General's from here and has been going back and forth. People are, hey, was it Jeff Sessions? Did he finally get him? And it
didn't sound like
very
Jeff
unlikely.
Sessions to me, though. When I read it, it did not sound like Jeff Sessions. Now, what's interesting is, could it have been a quote-unquote, like you said, there's 8 million senior administration officials. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a department chair, an agency chief that's confirmed and gone. I just would be very surprised if that was the case. Because if that was the case, it almost makes them look worse for not standing up. But is it your second level, your vice administrator type position that's writing these things? But at the same time, those questions of, well, if you think he's so bad, and you're bordering on saying he's, bat crazy, and y'all are not doing anything, and you're just sitting there and writing an op-ed about it, it just doesn't. There's part of me that questions the motivations, and I think that's what a lot of people do when they see the media now, is they question the motivation behind it. Here we have this book that comes out, and then we have this op-ed, and the timing, If anything, to me, though, the timing lends a little bit of truth to it, or a little bit more truth, I should say, because if it came out a week before the midterms, I would question the timing a little more. This is kind of a, not a dead period, but it's not quite as active a period as far as when they release this. So I don't know. I read something, because I forget how many administration officials have denied it. Of course, they're all going to deny it. Right. But how many times Deep Throat denied being Deep Throat when he actually was, and he denied it for years and years. So we will find out who it is. And if it turns out it's the secretary, then the Times is going to have some explanation. And they should. They should say, this is what backed this up and why we went. It's interesting, though, they couched it as an op-ed. So they're saying this is a voice, this is not our voice. So they did leave themselves a little bit of a loophole there.
Right. They didn't write a story that quoted this person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
and there's a difference.
Now,
most of the public does not, nor should they. They're probably not super concerned on the difference between an op-ed and a story. But for someone closer, it's a huge difference. They basically ran a long letter to the editors, what they ran.
Yeah.
And we all know that can be,
yeah,
you get what you get sometimes.
People run some crazy stuff because that's a voice that's out there, and here you go,
Right.
Yeah.
But by proxy, they gave it credibility because of their name, and that's a situation newspapers and media has had for years. You're giving someone credibility, and you have to decide if it's worth that or not.
Right. You kind of have to understand. You kind of need to know their motive. So, if we help these people out, and then and this is completely separate. This is this person wants to write on this issue, and then we find out later it was the Klan. What are the motives?
Right.
We need to know the motives ahead of time. And the motives is really what I was concerned about. I totally believe the New York Times is going to vet this person. They are going to know who it is.
Sure.
They've spent time with this person.
Yeah.
I believe this person, they were pretty sure that it's mostly accurate, as a matter of fact, and I think there's probably a lot of truth in it. At the same time, the person's painting themselves as this conservative fighting the principled fight on the inside. I kind of question a lot of that because, and the timing is part of that. It's not a week before the midterms, but it's before the midterms, period. If you're going to primary Trump, you're going to begin in November. If the Republicans want to mount some opposition of their own and say, let's go a little safer route. And also it's during Kavanaugh week, and it's a day after the Bob Woodward book.
Now that's a good point. Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. And if you really are trying to help the positives of Trump's conservative successes, then why do you grease up the road? You're claiming that you're wanting to keep it on the rails, but this person's job did not just get easier a day after this thing was published. I guess
no. And what's interesting is the op-ed even gives Trump some credit on some things, and it criticizes him in a way that I have criticized the president, which is he's doing some good policies. Look at our economy. We've got the author talks about that, but he keeps letting these sort of personality quirks of his get in the way, which is a valid complaint. There's not one thing about that that's not valid. Mm-hmm. It's the anonymous nature, if you're going to believe that, because for a reporter, anonymous sources are such a touchy subject. And, I would never want to have somebody come back to me and say, your anonymous source wasn't valid, or it wasn't, I have to have not just 100% confidence in an anonymous source, I have to have 150% confidence.
Right.
And so I hope, obviously they're a bastion of journalism, and I'm not calling that into question, but I am saying it's a risky move to do that.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
What are some of your experiences with the unnamed sources?
Well, I've thought about that a lot this week because I was a fresh out of college reporter, writing obituaries, and I had somebody tell me something one time, and it wasn't anything major. It was a local election, but the guy ended up losing, and I realized later that the person who gave me the information was his opponent's next door neighbor. That was just a young reporter on a super microcosm scale, not knowing better,
Right.
But interestingly enough, and I'll pull back the curtain a little here because there's been enough time where I think I'm comfortable for doing this. When we were,
Be
shortly
sure.
after Governor, I'm positive, I'm okay. Sure, I will not reveal too much. But shortly after Governor Bentley's wife filed for divorce, of course the rumors were, your wife of 50 years leaves you, rumors are going to, spread. But talked to some people, including one who I personally had known 20 plus years, who had been in Montgomery 20 plus years, who detailed for me the governor's relationship with Rebecca Mason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was a long time before this became, I don't want to say it wasn't public because so many people did know, but nobody had, concrete.
Mm-hmm.
So this person wanted to report it, but be anonymous. And while every fiber of my being wanted to go with that story because it's a heck of a story, something held me back, and it was a smart editor named K.A. Turner who held me back, who just kept saying, we need more, we need more, we need more. And she was right. She made the right call.
Yeah.
Because when you dug a little deeper into that story, while he did know a lot, there wasn't that, here is my proof. It was, well, I heard this. And while it was valid, it wasn't that, it did not meet or exceed the expectations for an unnamed source.
Right.
So we didn't go with it. Now, what's interesting about that, and he reminds me of this occasionally when I talk to him, he was 100% correct. I don't want people thinking we spiked the story. It never got to that point. It just, we had to have more in concrete evidence. Now, on the flip side of that unnamed source thing, shortly after all this happened, I received a comment from someone about Governor Bentley's wife not wanting to attend his own inauguration and how she had to be talked into it. And so it pointed to an obvious discord that dated back before anybody knew it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in this case, that was not my source. That was just a tip. Then I went to someone else I knew who was an anonymous source who did not seek me out and frankly wasn't thrilled to be talking to me at that time. But again, it was somebody I knew a long period of time and just said, in what a way I think sometimes reporters have to say, look, I've been told this and I don't want to report something inaccurate. If I'm right, tell me. If I'm wrong, tell me. And this was a person as close to that situation you could be if your last name was not Bentley.
Mm-hmm.
I knew they knew, and they confirmed it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, we went with it, and that met the proximity of that person, the experience of that person. It lent credibility where I was 100% comfortable and turned out to be completely correct, when we got more details. So it's always a judgment call. And I've thought about that Rebecca Mason, Robert Bentley.
Have you been talking to another unnamed source about something?
That was not a prediction. Yes, not a prediction. It was a Freudian slip. When we talked about that story, it really would have only taken, one person who had more than just incidental knowledge. If there was any sort of, and what turned out to be the cell phone records. That's what turned out. What broke it all open was Mrs. Bentley's cell phone screenshots of her husband's conversations and the audio. If we'd had even one of those, it would have been enough. So, as much as I hate not scooping everybody on that story in a year before, it wasn't for lack of effort, and it was because we were being judicious with what we did, which was the right call.
Yeah, especially something explosive like that. And that's the thing, when it's something that is going to affect people so much. What you said, the one that you went with, the source that you went with was also a good source. But that wasn't quite the whole story. Her questioning whether she's going to go, you could let people read between the lines and you could let a little out, but you didn't say, hey.
It shed light on their relationship.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I thought what was so fascinating, and that story's always very interesting to me, the dynamics that it took, because the person really explained up until the last minute they didn't know if she'd walk in the door. And like the rest of Alabama, I saw the pictures from that event, and they're holding hands, and she's smiling and waving, and they're on the the platform together. And now to look back and think, wow, she almost didn't walk in the door, and his family didn't almost come, which would have been a real sign of things to come. But again, you had to consider the job of that source, how connected they were. Not that the other source wasn't credible, but it was just a different type of source. Are you in a position to know this irrefutably? Mm-hmm. And that's the question I think the Times has got is your author in the position to know this without a doubt? Mm-hmm. And, while there are a ton of quote-unquote senior administration officials, I'm going to, I don't know, maybe 50 that would be in a position to know that irrefutably. I don't know. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I think that and I'm speculating here on their part. Maybe that explains why it was an op-ed instead of a story, was that they're really, really sure of who this person is and that they're in a position for this to be true, but maybe they were so nervous about whether line by line it's all true. Maybe this person's blowing smoke. I mean, because, a lot of people who leak stuff, it's an ego thing. They're making points with a reporter, or they're just want to see themselves make the paper, even if it's not in name. I mean,
or they want to make the paper look silly, and that happens.
Yeah,
I've had people do that before. Mm-hmm. They tell you something they know is not true because they want you. A lot of times that'll be in like a political campaign. They want you to raise the question with somebody else, and you look like an idiot. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, and I don't think that was the case here, but there's a lot of reasons people come forward with information. And during the Bentley thing, I have jokingly said if I printed every rumor that I was told about Robert Bentley in the 2 years frame that we were dealing with him, it would fill a book.
Right.
I mean, it involved paternity tests and drugstore visits and you name it. And those people were not in a position to know other than,
Yeah, it gets to a point where there's glory in being a source, You want to be people, they start coming out of the woods then.
Now, in both the cases I refer to, I reached out to those people. They did not reach out to me. But the second, and it was, at that time, it was a basic cattle call. We were all talking to anybody we could. Mm-hmm. And, that was a different situation. But we look back at like the Roy Moore situation with the Washington Post. I think it was very obvious that with the allegations against Roy Moore, that with Lee Corfman's, you could not have gone with an anonymous source. I think that would have been a disaster. You had to have someone willing, as hard as that was for her, and I can imagine whether you believe her or don't believe her, the woman obviously set herself up for as a huge target. Right. And you had to have a name tied to that. Mm-hmm. We got the same anonymous sources during that not Lee Corfman, but people started coming out of the woodwork. But a lot of it is, well, I heard this happened at the mall. And those kind of rumors, it's like nailing Jell-O to the wall. Right. It's very hard to prove those things. Mm-hmm. Especially after, that's the other interesting thing about the Times op-ed is a lot of time these anonymous sources, even with the Bentley thing, we were dealing with a couple of years old. Or things that happened. I mean, the way the New York Times op-ed is written is this is like now. It's written in the present day, a lot more Watergate-ish than. But golly, I'd love to know who that is. I'm a reader. I'm curious too, and I've read the list of people who said no, it's not me. And I will say, when I read it, and I'm not saying it couldn't be someone on his staff. Because, frankly, if I had to sit there and listen to my boss be called an idiot, and I liked my boss, I'd probably get mad, too. Mm. It did not read to me like Jeff Sessions sat down and wrote this, nor do I think he did. It just doesn't sound like his verbiage.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like a younger, and that may just be my projections on it, not a Department of Defense secretary, but, James Mattis is not somebody like that, because he would cuss more. But, and he would probably just look at Trump and say, yeah, go do what? But what concerns me, obviously, then, or if the author is revealed and it's not to the level of senior administration official that we think it should be, there's another black eye for journalism that we're all going to have to live with.
Absolutely. And that's something else we have to consider when we're doing these kinds of stories and we're using these kinds of sources, is the atmosphere that we're in right now, that people do not believe one side or the other. They think certain media is on their side and certain media is on the other side. And, perception is, even if they're wrong, perception is so important. Right. You have to continue to work on that.
First of all, if you want me to delete your email, send me something with the word fake news in the subject. I will delete your email, right away. Just don't want to hear it. I hate that term. But this is Leada the reader and viewer, not Leada the reporter. I get it. I totally get it. When you see a uncut footage of something that, let's just say the president does, maybe someone else does, and you watch one network and it's presented one way, and then you flip over to another network and it's presented the polar opposite way, you're left with nothing to decide, but there is an agenda. Mm-hmm. And I think we as the media have to go up now, and I'm sorry, my friends at Fox News or CNN, we've got to be able to make an educated decision over what I would call media attainment, or, this sort of opinion-based news versus a news story. And that's on us reporters too. One of the best compliments I can get is when someone says, I don't know where you stand politically. You shouldn't know where I stand politically. I'm not an opinion writer.
Right.
I want you to be guessing. I don't want you to worry about where I stand politically. Mm-hmm. So I think some of that's on us. And I completely agree with people who say, well, it's because the media is biased. There are times that the media is biased. But I also think sometimes that just painting that broad picture, you make a big mistake. At the same time, while it's easy to lump the media together as some big lumpy thing, they're people. And, they're your neighbors, and they're the people you go to church with and you go to work with. And I just think you've got to be careful with any group just saying, they're all XYZ, because it's not the truth.
Yeah. No,
there's my stand for the media.
It's not the truth. I'll go and I'll challenge the media also in this sense. We understand that newsrooms need to be diverse. They're often not very diverse. We know that if we live in a city that is 40 or even 60% African American, and we have an all-white newsroom, that's a problem, because there are voices that we just don't understand sometimes. And that's not, it's not that there's any evil intent behind it at all, but it is, sometimes you have to force that kind of diversity in your newsroom. Well, it's the same thing on ideologies. If you have the person who reports the story and writes the story, and the person who assigned the story, and the person who writes the headline, and the person who edits the story, all feeling exactly the same way, there are professionals, and I believe they're going to do a good job and do a good story, but they're going to overlook certain voices and certain perspectives. And that's when you have these subtle things get into your work that can make you look like you're more biased than you're trying to be. And that's been a long time.
At the same time. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is. And at the same time, what does drive me crazy, and the reason I said that about the fake news, is because let's say there's a poll that says that President Trump's approval rating is 46%. And I am literally saying President Trump's approval rating is 46%. Among Republicans, it's whatever. I mean, it is a straightforward, here are the numbers of this poll. I always try to identify if a poll is more right-leaning or left-leaning, because there are polls that are like that. Here's the margin of error, straight-up story. And then you get 5 emails that say, you hate Trump, what? And I'm like, wait, hold on, what?
Right.
What? Did you read the story? Which is my other comeback is, did you read the story? Because 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
No, it's a headline. But, I
read the headline. But, I did not create the poll. It's not Leada's poll. It's a poll.
Right.
take it for what it's worth. So let's just hope that the New York Times senior administration official is indeed a senior administration official who's not just mad because there was no coffee in the break room that day. And, that would be my concern. And of course, what's so funny is I start thinking about people that are from Alabama that worked for the White House that are not working for the White House. I'm like, your mind just starts going like, who decides to sit down and did they actually call the New York Times? Like, who did you call? Is it their next door neighbor? They happen to live in New York. I'm sure there are, closed caption cameras somewhere around the New York Times for security reasons. I certainly hope there are for all of us sakes. But, does somebody did you meet them in the parking lot wearing a trench coat? It's just,
well, it's Washington,
the logistics of this.
It's Washington.
Yeah, the logistics of
it's
this.
incestuous. I mean, Jake Tapper wrote the column that time. He went on a date with Monica Lewinsky before all that. The story went over. I mean, these people all know each other, and they have that's how you get inside things. And I will make one, disclaimer. When we were talking about media and we used the word we're talking about the media at large. So.
Oh, yes. Universal we, not we as in us. Yeah.
We're sort of very different from people who directly cover Washington, although we do stories there that matter to us, and we cover the state. It's kind of the more local you get, the more it's not quite the same left-right politics. So, but we still have those same issues we have to pay attention to, but it's different at every level of media.
It is absolutely, and like I said, I've worked at the tiniest newspapers in this state, and now I'm with the largest, media organization in the state. State media is very different. It is very different. Yeah. There's still diversity in views, but we deal with different challenges. I think we deal with more like geographic challenges and time challenges. It's a different set of things. Now, there are liberal people, there are conservative people, there are different people. But I will say I get tickled sometimes when I get these things about AL.com, the liberal media, and then when you compare that to so many other places, we would be considered very conservative. So, it's an interesting dynamic. But no, that is absolutely the universal we, not we as in me and Ike. No, or anybody we work with on a daily basis. No, not the case. Thankfully. Thank you, Lord.
We love everybody here. And in that,
well, now let's don't get crazy. No, I'm just kidding.
in that vein, we lost a guy this week who was, certainly a Southern icon, was Burt Reynolds. And I know we're still going outside the state lines, but what an impact on the culture. So I'll bring that up. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I have to tell you those, and what I call them, and a lot of other people use this word, Hicksploitation movies. I know Burt would be offended by that, but those early ones, Deliverance and Gator and White Lightning, I could watch those all the time. All those that used to play on the Superstation, and I'm a big fan of those. But and of course, Smoking the Bandit.
I will say, oh yeah, absolutely, that growing up. Every time Smokey, we had 3 channels, so it wasn't like, PBS, but we didn't count that. But so you had 3 channels, and Smokey and the Bandit would come on. My dad would tell me the same story, which was that it was part of the car jump scene was filmed in Walker County, Alabama, which is where my father's from, Walker County. And that's about as rural, especially back then, as you could get. And I always thought he made it up. Like, your dad tells you stories that you're just like, yeah, whatever. And he was right. It actually was filmed in Walker County, Alabama. And the other part about that, we were actually discussing this in my household today, of when I was a kid, I loved the movie The Longest Yard. I just loved the movie The Longest Yard. And I said, have we done a disservice not letting our child watch The Longest Yard? And then I thought, wait, I need to go back and watch this again, because, a lot of the things that we watched, I realize now were just highly inappropriate, but we just didn't catch the meaning. Yep. And I probably need to vet that a little bit more before my 11-year-old tunes into The Longest Yard. And I don't want any remakes with Adam Sandler and all that mess. I want the real deal.
Right.
Mean Machine. That's what I want. So, yeah, it was sad. And it's, when you think he's 80, he was 82. And you're just like, wow. I mean, when I was a kid, he was it. He and Joe Namath were they were the sexiest thing you could find. There was no better than those two. And it's like, here's another one that we've lost. But it seemed to be a life well lived. It's certainly colorful. We'll say that. Do you remember? Go ahead.
He wasn't a spring chicken when you're talking about necessarily. I mean, when he was top box office, he was up into his 30s and maybe even, in his 40s. And so there's hope for some.
And balding. See, we forgot about that. You remember the whole discussion about his toupee?
That's right.
Like that was a big joke about his toupee. And I think that's why people liked him, though. He always kind of had that tongue-in-cheek. He could laugh at himself. Some, he wasn't so serious. And I heard a great thing today about all the roles he had turned down. He was offered just about every movie you could be offered. And but so he is. He's not from Alabama, but I think he certainly would have, if you ran into him at the Floribama, he would have fit right in, and you never would have, checked up. But Florida, we'll give you Florida people a pass. You're okay.
Oh, well, yeah, he's very so. He was actually born in Michigan, but as a child, his dad took a job and was a police chief, I think, down in Florida. And you definitely get your Southern roots down there. And he went to Florida State. I think he said that he had visited Miami and was going to go to Miami to play football there, but he went to Florida State, and there were about 2 college women to every 1 college man, and he just made his decision based on that. Of course, he decided
to go there.
Yeah, he roomed with Lee Corso.
Yeah, roomed with Corso.
And then tried to lose his accent when he went away to do movies, and was I've seen interviews where he was successful doing that, but then the movies he got was can you get your accent back?
Well, and he had that very unique voice. You could hear his voice and know who it was without even knowing it was him. So he was definitely, and those old movies are great. And like I said, we're going to have to rescreen Longest Yard Around My House, and if it's appropriate, we may have to fast forward through a little things. But it was funny, my husband and I talking today about, well, do you remember when this happened and this happened? And, both of us kind of remember different parts of the movie. And but yeah, it was Smokey and the Bandit and that Trans Am, the whole thing, you just couldn't help but love it. And and can I give you a plug? Let me give you a plug. If you don't know this, on the 40th anniversary, wasn't it, of Smokey and the Bandit, Ike on AL.com did this really cool thing about CB lingo. And my father had a CD. I guess it was that Walker County connection. So I remember having a CB in his truck, and my grandfather had a CB. And yesterday, after Burt Reynolds passed away, that story got picked up again, and people started reading that story, which I just thought was so fascinating, that little niche of 70s culture came back, even for just a little while, and I had to explain, of course, to my child what a CB was, and
it's a cell phone that connected to your truck.
Silverado or whatever. yeah, that was the best way to describe it. It was like a cell phone connected to your truck. And then, interestingly enough, it had all those songs about CB radios and truckers and that whole, Smokey and the Bandit song. All that kind of stuff was just so iconic of the 70s, and then on into the early 80s, where he was kind of the low-cut shirt with the hairy chest. So, it's sad. But he seemed to have passed away peacefully, is what I've read, with his family. So I guess that's
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give one.
Good hair.
One more anecdote about Burt. When I was working for the Tallahassee Democrat, we did a special section when Bobby Bowden won his 300th career game. And we had this double 2-page spread with just quotes from anyone that we could get quotes from about Coach Bowden, and we wanted fresh quotes. So we had a couple reporters calling around all over actually Steve Ellis, one reporter probably got most of them. And he called, he got Corso, of course, and all the other Schnellenberger and all the of Bowden's coaches that he faced. Of course, you called Burt Reynolds, longtime friends, and Burt said that he gave us the best one, and I can't remember word for word, but he said something along the lines of, "My dad's getting older, and one day he's not going to be here, and on that day, the first person I'm going to call is Bobby Bowden." And I just thought it was the sweetest thing, and it made Burt such a real person, who has feelings like that for people.
That's a great quote. That's really neat.
Yeah. We were pretty proud of getting that. And Steve Ellis, the late sports writer, got that quote. He's He was one of the best reporters I've ever worked with. But
That is cool.
Leada, I really appreciate you spending some time with me again this weekend.
Thanks. Enjoyed it. We got to talk about anonymous sources and Burt Reynolds.
That's two of my favorite subjects of all time.
Turns out the op-ed writer was Burt Reynolds. There you go. I leaked it. I just blew it out of the water.
I'm going to go now watch All the President's Men, followed by Hooper. And
yeah. Yeah, sounds good. That's what I'll do this weekend, too. After the football games. Let's get our priorities right.
All right. Well, thanks. Well, we'll talk to you later.
Okay. Thanks, Ike.
Hey, thanks, everybody, for listening. And don't forget, if you don't mind and you haven't already, go rate us on whatever app you use or on our Amazon page if you listen via Alexa. I'm told that helps us reach people and might keep us doing what we do a little longer. We all have a great weekend. For Leada Gore, I'm Ike Morgan. We're down in Alabama. Come see us at al.com.